Prime Minister Carney and the Canadian delegation have landed in India. They're there in hopes of resetting relations and establishing greater trade with a major world market. Ahead of the trip, Ottawa signaled alleged Indian-linked violence in Canada has stopped, clearing the way for a major economic push. It was a confusing message for communities back in Canada who are currently dealing with extortion crimes and police warnings of death threats. And before leaving for this trip, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand stated that public safety is still a concern. Miriam Mufti is the Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo, and she joins us once again this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
There is no trade without a relationship, and any negotiations are reliant on being about finding common ground. Where do our relations with India sit as of this today, Friday, the first day of this trip?
I mean, this is about pragmatic foreign policy, right? Prime Minister Carney has promised to boost non-U.S. exports by $300 billion over the next 10 years, and India has to be a part of that plan. The size of the Indian economy and the very large consumer base that the Indian economy offers is extremely important to what Canada is looking for here, which is a growth in its own trade diversification and growth in its economy. Now, India is also extremely interested, and I think this is partly on account of the global context where the U.S. trade war that has been launched by President Donald Trump's tariffs have hurt trade sectors in both Canada and India. So I think this time is different. India and Canada need one another for the kind of trade diversification that both countries are looking for.
That term, pragmatic foreign policy, is also what Anita Anand used yesterday. She was speaking to journalist Jamie Poisson on Front Burner of the podcast. She described it that way as well, that the Carney government's approach is pragmatic foreign policy. But what does that mean in everyday terms? What does that mean when it comes to negotiations? What are we willing to overlook or put aside in order to get a trade deal?
Right, so this trip is all about business. Right. There is, I think, a laser focus on what it is that the Canadian government is trying to achieve over here. The first is, of course, a reset in the Indo-Canadian relationship, but mostly for the purposes of growing the Canadian economy. That's what Canada is looking for, and that's why the use of the word pragmatic. Now, it does mean that the Canadian government may have to set aside some of those accusations that were made in 2023 by the Trudeau government against the Indian regime, and the Canadian government is claiming that those considerations have been taken into account and that they have been dealt with. I think moving forward, what the Canadian government would also like to achieve here is that all the concerns, the security allegations that have been made against the Indian government are actually dealt through credible law enforcement practices and policies, and through the proper structured channels to deal with national security cooperation between India and Canada. And I think they want to move away from diplomacy that is being aired in the public and is causing tensions with the Sikh diaspora community, the Indo-Canadian diaspora community in Canada. And I don't think that the Canadian government is saying that it's going to overlook how this particular community feels or the threats to public security. I think what they're trying to say is that this needs to happen through proper structured channels, and that this has to be done through credible law enforcement practices.
Which it has been since 2023, which is where those allegations and then arrests came from, was from an RCMP investigation in 2023, before then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau got up in the House of Commons and accused the Indian government of being involved in a murder in Canadian soil. On that point, that RCMP investigation in this country is still open. There have been 4 arrests in relation to that, and it is still open, but the messaging has changed. They've moved away from linking the Indian government, saying that they're still focused on the alleged perpetrators of that crime. I want to ask you around messaging, because yesterday the headline in the Times of India said Canada says there's no longer a threat from India. What is the reaction in India to this trip?
I think the Indian government is welcoming it. This time is different. The Indian government has also set aside some of its claims against the Canadian government for harboring Sikh separatists on Canadian soil, and for this and the Indian government is welcoming this particular opportunity. I think The start of the thawing of relations, or this rapprochement, began in Alberta last year when Prime Minister Mark Carney invited Narendra Modi to visit the G7 meeting. And I think on the sidelines of some of these global governance fora, the Canadian government has made this interest very, very clear towards expanding the economic relationship between the two countries, and the Indian government has welcomed it. And the Indian government also, given the global context of U.S. protectionism, is looking forward to rebuilding the relationship and the lost time since 2023.
Last question to you. How, we know it's a fine line that Prime Minister Carney has to walk. He's not only repairing a damaged relationship from the past, he's trying to reset a new one and get trade deals in new areas for this country. We have over $30 billion worth of trade in India. The hope through CEPA is to double that to $70 million.
That's right.
Really quickly, talk to me about the landmines he needs to avoid on this trip.
He really needs to sidestep the issue of the Indo-Canadian diaspora in Canada that is really, really feeling disaffected by this particular trip. I think he has to be very clear on what is happening over here. He needs to make it very clear to his own constituencies, and in fact, the constituency of the Liberal Party, that this is not necessarily against the interests of Canadian citizens, and that the Canadian government will very much stand in line with any threats received by Canadian citizens on Canadian soil by a foreign government. I think he needs to be very, very careful about that. Carney is already avoiding the big potential landmine by not visiting Punjab and making this trip about business and business alone. I think almost all of his meetings in Mumbai are with Indian firms and Canadian firms, and to expand that business-to-business connection. He's also ensuring that the meeting that he has with Modi is laser focused on one particular issue, which is the growth of the economic sectors and finding new opportunities for growth between India and Canada. And I think at this point in time, Carney is looking to expand deeper energy ties with India. I think in question right now is to what extent Canada is going to agree to provide uranium to the Indian government. And then, of course, there's also all of the other sectors that have traditionally been common to both India and Canada. For example, the Saskatchewan economy providing grams and pulses to India. And then, of course, expanding our energy ties on AI, on quantum computing, and so on.
Maryam Mufti, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo. Thank you so much for your time today. We will watch and wait and see what comes out of this 4-day trip to India. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.